If you look at Bobby from the outside, he is probably the last guy you would pick as a future boss. He is quiet, soft-spoken, polite, little overweight, and for a long time he has never even killed anybody. In a world where respect is usually built on fear, stories, and a willingness to do terrible things, Bobby comes across more like a loyal employee than a feared leader. But the show slowly pushes him closer to the center of power. He becomes Tony's driver, his bodyguard, his closest loyalist after others either betray Tony, drift away, or die. So it is fair to ask the question, if something happened to Tony and Silvio, did Bobby have what it takes to step up and run the family? Or was he always meant to be a strong right-hand man and nothing more? To answer that, you first need to understand who Bobby actually is inside that baggy suit. He is one of the few people in that life who genuinely seems to have a heart. He takes care of Junior with real patience, not just obligation. He treats people with respect, even people below him, like the guys at the train shop. He loves his kids, and later he clearly loves Janice, even if she is chaotic and manipulative. Unlike many others, he is not always thinking about money, status, or getting one over on someone. When you see Bobby, you see someone who actually feels guilty, who worries, who struggles with what he has to do. Those traits make him more human, but they also raise the question, can someone this human survive at the top of a violent criminal hierarchy? One of Bobby's biggest strengths is his reliability. Tony trusts him more and more as time goes on. Bobby does not gossip behind Tony's back. He does not try to position himself to take over. He is not like Ralphie, Richie, or even Paulie in that sense. Those guys always had side agendas, grudges, and ambitions. Bobby mainly wants a house, his model trains, and a stable life for his family. That calm nature is the reason Tony feels comfortable giving him bigger and bigger tasks. When things get messy, Bobby doesn't add more chaos. He just quietly does the job and goes home. A boss needs people like that around him, but the question is whether that same steady personality could move from being the loyal soldier to the man everyone answers to. There's also the issue of how Bobby views violence. For most of the series, it is a running point that he has never made his bones. In that world, that is almost unheard of for someone at his rank. You can see that Bobby is not eager to cross that line. When he finally does commit his first murder, up at the cabin in Canada, it weighs heavily on him. He is shaken, quiet, withdrawn. He understands what it means. He is not like some of the others who seem to get a rush from bloodshed. This is both a good sign and a bad sign. On one hand, it means he is not reckless, not trigger-happy, and not going to start wars just to feel powerful. On the other hand, a boss in that world has to project that he is willing to go all the way when needed, without hesitation. If the people under him sense too much reluctance, they might start thinking he can be tested. At the same time, Bobby is not a coward. This is important to remember. When Tony asks him to do that hit, Bobby does it. When he fights Tony at the lake house after Janice is insulted, he fights like an animal. That scene is important for understanding his inner core. He is not naturally violent, but when he is pushed to the edge, there is something real and dangerous in him. He is physically strong, he doesn't back down, and he can surprise people who thought of him as just a quiet, soft guy. A boss does not need to be the loudest killer in the room, but he does need that inner line that you do not cross. Bobby shows that he has one, especially when it comes to his dignity and his family. Now think about the internal politics of the crew. Being boss is not just about being tough or loyal. It is also about managing egos, money, alliances, and the New York connection. Tony is good at that because he has a natural sense for people. He knows who can be played, who needs to be flattered, who needs to be threatened, and who must be respected. Bobby does not have that same sharp, manipulative instinct. He is honest to a fault. He speaks his mind in a simple way. You never feel like he's playing a deep game. That might make people feel safer around him, but it might also leave him open to being played, especially by the smarter and colder guys around him. Look at how Bobby came up. He was always connected through Junior and then through Tony, not through his own separate network. He did not build his own strong crew that worships him the way others did. Tony has people like Christopher, Patsy Benny, and others grouped around him because he is the main center of power. Bobby, even as he becomes a captain, is more like an extension of Tony's will than his own independent force. So if Tony and Silvio are taken out, Bobby would inherit a position, but not necessarily a strong personal base. The older guys might respect him, but they do not fear him the way they feared Tony or even Richie back in the day. Respect without fear can be fragile in that world. On the positive side, Bobby is not greedy beyond reason. One of the biggest problems with bosses in that world is that they take too much. They squeeze the guys under them, skim off everything, and then act shocked when people start plotting behind their backs. Bobby does not show that kind of greed. When he gets a raise or a new earning opportunity, he just seems grateful. He doesn't push too hard. As a boss, that could actually keep the crew more loyal. The guys might appreciate someone who is fair, who lets them eat, who does not scream at them for every small mistake. A calm and fair boss can create a stable environment where everyone makes money and nobody is rushing into betrayals. But there is a fine line between being fair and being seen as weak. Tony can afford moments of generosity because everyone also knows his dark side. They've heard the stories, they've seen what happens to people who cross him, and they've watched him snap on people. Bobby has almost no legend like that. His name does not automatically bring fear. If he became boss, he would be in a strange position where he would need to prove himself without completely changing who he is. If he suddenly became overly harsh, everyone would feel the shift and might see it as forced or fake. If he stayed exactly as he was, some of the tougher or more ambitious guys might push boundaries little by little, thinking there is no real price for doing so. New York would be another problem. They already look at Tony's side of the river with a certain mix of respect and disrespect. They know Tony can earn, but they also think of his people as emotional, unstable, always fighting each other. Bobby, as a quiet and almost gentle figure, would have a hard time commanding respect from men like Butch or any next generation New York boss. They would likely see him as someone they could push around at the negotiation table. That could mean worse terms in business deals, more demands, less territory, and overall less leverage. A boss who looks too soft in front of New York can accidentally give away a lot just by not knowing how to push back. On the other hand, you can imagine a scenario where Bobby's personality actually calms things down between the two sides. He is not hot-headed like Tony. He does not carry the same ego. He might be more willing to compromise to keep the peace and protect his people from war. His priority has always been his family and a quiet life. If becoming boss meant he could guide the family into a more low-key, money-focused direction, he might use that role not to dominate the world, but to prevent it from crashing down. In that sense, he might be better for the long-term survival of the group than a more prideful, aggressive leader. One thing that also matters is how the other captains and key guys see Bobby. You can tell that many of them like him personally. They laugh with him, they eat with him, they don't talk too much trash behind his back. He is not divisive. A lot of people in that world are tolerated but not truly liked. Bobby seems genuinely liked. That gives him a quiet form of power. When Tony fights him and loses, people are shocked, but they are not disgusted by Bobby. They mostly blame Tony for letting his temper and his drinking go too far. That shows how much goodwill Bobby has built just by being decent. A boss with goodwill can sometimes get away with decisions that others could not. People will give him the benefit of the doubt longer. Still, being liked is not the same as being followed into the fire. For example, when it is time to do a hard job, like executing someone important or starting a war, would the other men feel that Bobby truly knows what he is doing? Or would they feel like they are risking their lives for a guy who is good-hearted, but maybe not built for war? In a crisis, confidence in leadership is everything. Tony, for all his flaws, gives people the impression that he can see 10 steps ahead. With Bobby, you never really get that vibe. He is practical, but not especially strategic. He handles what is in front of him rather than running complex plays. Another key point is his relationship with Janice. If Bobby became boss, Janice would be the boss's wife. That is a scary thought for the stability of the organization. Janice is self-centered, greedy, emotional, and manipulative. She would constantly push Bobby to demand more, to chase status, to punish people who she thinks disrespected them. Over time, this could twist his calm nature. You can already see small signs of that after they are married. Bobby starts dressing a bit sharper, worrying more about his rank, and caring more about money. If he rose to the top, Janice would likely see herself as a kind of queen, pushing him into conflicts he might otherwise avoid. So even if Bobby's own instincts are peaceful, the woman at his side could drag him into unneeded drama, the same way she brought chaos into other men's lives. At the same time, you cannot ignore that Tony himself sees something in Bobby. Tony is not sentimental when it comes to business decisions. He might like somebody, but if he feels they are not useful, he will keep them in a limited role. Tony slowly gives Bobby more power, more trust, more responsibility. He has him sit in on important meetings. He shares sensitive information with him. He even admits at times that Bobby is one of the few people he can really count on. That is not by accident. Tony senses that Bobby is loyal, clean in terms of betrayal, and not greedy. Those are rare traits. If Tony had to imagine someone taking over parts of the operation in a worst-case scenario, Bobby would be one of the names in his head, even if he would never say it out loud. But so does Bobby have what it takes to be boss? The answer is not simple. If you define a boss by the classic standards of that world, he actually fails a lot of the tests. He doesn't have the long list of violent stories behind him. He doesn't have the sharp political mind. He doesn't have a strong independent crew that owes loyalty to him personally. He does not carry the kind of fear around him that keeps everyone in line. New York would see him as an easy mark. Janice would push him into mistakes. In a world filled with sharks, Bobby is more like a big, friendly fish who just happens to be strong when cornered. But if you change the definition a bit and think about the kind of boss that might give the family a chance to quietly survive, not necessarily dominate, then Bobby suddenly looks much more possible. His fairness, his loyalty, his lack of greed, his genuine care for people, and his basic common sense could bring stability. He would not rob his own men. He would not start wars for ego. He would focus on money, peace, and home. A lot of the young guys under him might appreciate that, especially in a world where the old way of doing things is already dying. He might become a transitional boss, someone who keeps things from falling apart while the next generation either fades out or goes legit. In the end, Bobby is almost the symbol of a question the show keeps asking: can a decent person really exist in that world and rise to the top? Or does the system always demand a certain level of ruthlessness and darkness that someone like him is not built for? If you believe that the system always wins, then no, Bobby was never meant to be boss. He is too kind, too honest, too soft around the edges. If you think there is a small space, even in that ugly world, for a different kind of leader, then yes, there is a version of the future where Bobby sits at the head of the table, not as a feared tyrant, but as a quiet caretaker, trying his best to hold together something that is slowly collapsing anyway. So the good of him and the bad of him are two sides of the same coin. The same traits that make him a good man by normal standards are the traits that might make him a weak boss by mafia standards. His loyalty, his fairness, his love for family, his discomfort with senseless violence. These are all admirable qualities, but they clash with the hard rules of the life he chose. Whether he had what it takes comes down to what you think it actually is. If it means being the scariest, most manipulative predator in the room, then Bobby was never that. If it means being the one who tries, against the odds, to protect his people and keep them earning without destroying everything around them, then maybe Bobby is closer to a real boss than anyone ever bothered to realize.